Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hangout Habits. I'm Nancy McSherry Jensen here with the Swing Shift. It's just me today, and I am delighted to introduce Dr. Julie Pham from Curiosity Based. She is here to talk with us about curiosity, respect, and making radical career shifts. So I want to tell you a little bit about Julie, and then we're going to talk. So she's changed careers at least twice. Julie's first move was from academia to publishing, and then to marketing and technology consulting and advocacy. Building on that work, she's the founder of Curiosity Based, which is a consulting practice committed to helping people realize the power of their own curiosity through workshops and facilitation. I always have trouble with that word. She's also the author of The 7 Forms of Respect, which should be available this spring 2022. So in this episode, we're going to discuss what prompted her moves, why she's working as an entrepreneur, what skills have been her power moves, and how the notion of curiosity and respect are integral to Dr. Pham's current work. So Julie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Nancy, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
I know, me too. So let's just get right into it. We've had a lot of clients who have strong academic backgrounds, but they've been challenged to leverage that academic success in other arenas. Now, you were a successful academic. You have degrees from Berkeley and the University of Cambridge. What prompted your first move away from that discipline?
Okay. Well, so I remember when I was finishing up my PhD, and I had gone straight from undergrad to grad school, and I had done all the things academics are supposed to do. I published in the right journals. I got to lecture at a university. I managed an academic journal. I spoke at conferences. I did all the things, and I realized, I looked inside and I was just like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And because I just felt it wasn't as dynamic as I wanted it to be. There were just not as many as relationship building wasn't as important. And also, quite honestly, as a tenured professor, you're waiting, or when you're looking for an academic job, you're actually waiting for someone to pass away or retire. And that's so that you can get a job in the middle of nowhere. and I was like, all right, that doesn't sound like something I want to do. So that's when I decided to leave academia just after I finished my dissertation.
Great. So you just said, I'm going to do something where I can, it sounds like work with people. You mentioned.
Yeah. And also what happened is my family has a Vietnamese language newspaper. Right. And my brother said, hey, can you come back and help? Can you help with the newspaper? And I decided, you know what? Yes. And I am going to get my real life MBA, and I'm going to switch to business, because I felt like business was starting to call. And I just felt like that would be a lot more dynamic and fun.
And so you jumped from academia to publishing. Now, let's talk a little bit about community, because community is such an essential component of change. So you went from the academic community to, a little bit of a return home, and then Vietnamese language newspaper community, and you've done so much other community work here. As you've made your different moves, what is the larger role of community for you? Because as the world is starting to open back up, a lot of people are thinking about, well, what communities do I want to re-engage with, somewhat in the way that you did, and what are communities that I want to reach out to? So maybe you could talk a little bit about the role of community for you.
I think community has been a teacher for me. I've learned so much from getting to work in different communities. And so one of the things about academia is that volunteering and community building is not that important. And so when I came back to Seattle, and this is where I grew up, and I was getting my real life MBA, and I started volunteering a lot. And I started to get pulled into a lot of board work and a lot of community building. And I was doing this for the very first time. And I remember serving on the Martin Luther King Business Association board, and there were 8 people. And I was the youngest person, and I was not that young. And there were 6 different languages spoken.
Wow.
right? And so, and like mobilizing down in South Seattle and just learning so much. I mean, I think of the volunteer work that I did, the community work that I did is actually my special courses when I was getting my real life MBA. And because I knew I had already spent most of my 20s in school, I was not going back to school for an MBA. And
Right.
so community has really been a teacher for me.
What, tell me a little more about what it taught you.
It taught me the power of relationship building. And so I ended up getting, I call it my personal board of directors.
Mhm.
And so, because I knew I was going to learn from mentors. And so through my volunteer work, I actually got a lot of really great mentorship. And so I remember one of my mentors, who was this head of sales at IBM, and then he was organizing this concert out of Seattle Symphony. And he said, compound interest. Remember, compound interest in relationships, because you invest in relationships and they pay dividends later on.
You know,
And
that
so,
Sarah talks about this all the time.
yeah, yeah. And so that was a really huge learning, and also just working across difference. And so I learned how to talk with different people from different backgrounds, addressing different needs, and to build partnerships. I mean, one of the first things I did when I was at the newspaper, I mean, I joined the newspaper in 2008, the end of 2008. This is the world, not just the recession, but the start of the decline of the print newspaper industry, and having to basically be super scrappy. Mm-hmm. And building partnerships across different ethnic media organizations. Right. And Nancy, I didn't know what I was doing at the time was called public-private partnerships. I'd never even heard of that word. Later on, I was like, oh, that's what I was doing. That's what it was called, right? And it was more of just like government agencies and nonprofits would say, hey, can you help us? And, and there were private companies. And I said, well, and so I ended up creating this coalition and a capacity building program for ethnic media to learn how to do business better. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, I then said to Comcast, well, you want to reach out to our communities. Can you teach us how to do online advertising? And there was a PR firm that was like, you are constantly trying to get us to do earned media, right? Right. Can you teach us how to talk about ourselves and distinguish this Chinese newspaper from that Chinese newspaper? Right. And the Seattle Public Library had all these resources. Can you teach us how to use your databases? And so in that, we kind of just shared what we had. And so I learned a lot about sharing what we have, and creating these win-win situations and how to think strategically and broadly.
Yeah, I really love this notion of reciprocity, mm-hmm. of here's what I can share with you. Now, could you share this other thing with me? And it's so important when people are looking to make their next move, whether mm-hmm. it's getting a jump in their current job, coming back after a break, switching roles or industries. It's really important to mm-hmm. do that.
Absolutely.
Really mm-hmm. important.
And you had a question about how to get re-engaged with the community, yes. right? If people yes. have been away for a while. I think that it's simply, hey, I haven't checked in one while. Can we have a conversation? This is what I've been up to. Mm-hmm. And they may say no, and that's fine, or they may not reply, and that's fine. You have to ask. So right. I don't think that, I mean, it's been so cool how there are people who I haven't talked to in years, and then they message me and they're like, hey, Julie, can we chat? I'm like, yes, let's continue. And I do that too. And so I think that if you invested early on, right, going back to the compound interest, you can, mm-hmm. you have those relationships.
Yes. Yeah. And I think many people feel vulnerable, mm-hmm. right? And especially after the last 2 years, that there's some compound interest and vulnerability in the last 2 years. And I do think that people do, what we hear from the people that we work with is they are a little afraid to ask. But there's research that shows that, particularly with Americans, if you ask them for assistance, 95% of the time, they will offer it to you in as much of a capacity as they can. I think that's a fascinating stat, mm-hmm. right? And the other 5% of the time, it's because they're just so busy with their own thing. It almost has nothing to do with you.
I think of the motion that we make with our hands to give something, and the motion we make with our hands to get something, mm-hmm. and it's the same motion.
It is.
right? It's like the same, like it looks the same, right? Your palm is open.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and that's a great way to think about that, because we recommend to people that when you're asking, just as you said, if there's ever anything I can do to help you now or in the future, and that goes a long way. I want to change gears here and talk a little bit about your next move. So you went from academia to publishing and marketing, and then in the middle of a pandemic, you decided to go out on your own. So I was wondering if you could talk a little about your business, Curiosity Based. And one of the things you and I talked about before we started our call was, how has your work, particularly with the Southeast Asian communities, and as someone who's a person of color, how has that affected your work as an entrepreneur and how you've gone about making these shifts?
So uh, one of the reasons why I wanted to start my own company was because we talk a lot about diversity in leadership and diversity in the workplace. And what I realized was, wow, most management and leadership books are written by white men.
Yes.
And so it was just, I mean, Nancy, you know this.
Yes,
right?
I do.
Yes. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to start my company was because I want to promote works written by women and by people of color. And this is not about rejecting works by white men. It's actually about adding and expanding our pool. And so that was one of the reasons why my personal identity has impacted how I wanted to the start of this. And also in terms of just curiosity, I mean, one of the things I learned when I was running that cross-sector collaboration fellowship, and I would see some fellows did really well and they really enjoyed themselves, and others kind of struggled. And I identified the thing that set those who were having fun and who were in the end they felt successful was curiosity. And it was really just that, like, if they just felt, no matter what I'm learning, I want to lean in. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I'm enjoying the journey and I'm enjoying learning from the people around me. Then they were ultimately so much more successful than those who were just so absolutely fixated on this certain outcome. And if they didn't get it, then they felt at the end they had failed.
Yeah.
And so that was another, what I also saw was on teams, if you could get more people who are curious, they could actually influence the morale of the rest of the team. And so that's why I was just like, oh, how do I take this? How do I share this with organizations to really to foster curiosity? And also, there's a lot of talk right now about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the way I think about inclusion is a sign of inclusion is, do people feel safe to ask questions? Because sometimes there are places where people, even though they say there's no stupid question, how many times have you seen someone ask a question that other people snicker?
Oh yeah, or the eye rolls.
The eye roll, right? Even like I think around conversations around DEI, and like there might be some DEI training, and then someone says, "Why are we doing this again?" And then everyone else is like, oh, "I can't believe he's saying that." And then other people are like, "Ooh, I better not ask a question."
Yeah,
that's not a culture of inclusion.
No, it's not, and some of it's based on fear. Right.
Yes.
And it's fear on both ends of, am I asking something that might be culturally insensitive and I'm going to get called out on it? Or the fear of, hey, things are going well for me and I don't need to rock this boat. I need a better metaphor for that. But you know what I mean? And I think there's fear at both ends of it. But you're right. I think in order for companies to be a better balanced in terms of their workforce and in terms of having people feel happier about staying, because right now people are reevaluating what they're doing for work in droves. I mean, there are so many people we're working with right now who are working and saying, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yes, absolutely. The Great Resignation.
It is. It's the Great Resignation. And so being able to retain people, and asking more questions in a smart way is so important. We ask our clients and cohorts to identify their superpowers, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what yours is and how it's shown up through your ongoing work.
I think it's the ability to ask questions and reframe the way that we see things. And so, and it's not to reject the existing way. It's just to be like, why do we see it that way? And so I do that often in my work. And so, um, for example, the idea of success. I mean, I created a module which is we talk about what does success look like all the time, and then I reframed it and I said, what about we ask also what does success feel like?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and there's just things that I will look at something and say, for example, I do a lot of work around assumptions, and usually people think about assumptions as bad to have. And there's a lot of shame and denial. And there's this popular notion that don't have assumptions. And for me, I just see it's impossible not to have assumptions. So why don't we lean into them and understand them and get curious about them and actually get curious about other people's assumptions, rather than judging ourselves and then also judging others and having all this fear around it.
Right.
So, and then and also with respect, the way that I see respect is a lot of people talk about it as if it's absolute and fixed and universal. Right. And so people have conversations like, I want you to respect me. Well, I am respecting you. No, you're not. And what's happening is they think that they're sharing the same idea of respect. And so in my work, I say I've identified actually, no, there are different expressions of the way that we see respect. There are different forms, and if I'm not getting the form that I like, that I need, then I might not feel respected. And people don't understand that it's actually relative and contradictory and subjective. So I think my superpower is the ability to ask questions and reframe, not to reject, just to reframe.
Well, and I think it's so valuable because for some of us who perhaps are just forward driving, need to guilty as charged. It's really valuable to say, well, okay, let's think about this in a different way. And I think especially right now, there's so many things being reframed and questioned that it's important to think about this as saying we're not rejecting what your current assumption, as you say, is. We're just trying to understand it better so that we can maybe come to a more common path and goal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you teased out this notion of respect. So I want to give you a little promo here. You've got a book coming out, and I saw the galley.
Yes, I'm super excited.
How are you feeling about that? And so it's called 7 Forms of Respect. So what prompted you to write this, and who is it intended to serve?
Well, so in a lot of the community building work that I do, I'm bringing together people, facilitating collaboration among people with really different backgrounds. And so I'd often see these kinds of clashes in understanding. And over time, I realized I think that there's different expectations of how to treat people, right? Like people want to be treated differently. And so then I started to do some research around that and to ask the question, well, how do you want to be treated, especially at work? And then people kept using the word respect. And so it's like, oh, this is really interesting because what I'm seeing is they're using this word respect, and yet there could be they see it differently. So I'll give you an example. Some people feel that to be respected is to be included in all emails. They want to see what's happening. And for someone else, it's actually disrespectful to be added to things that don't pertain to them. And it's like, I'm only going to give you information on a need to know basis. That's actually respectful. Right. And so you can see how the same action, one person can see as respectful, another person can see as disrespectful.
Yeah.
Or even just the unsolicited feedback. So one person could be like, oh, I love getting unsolicited feedback. And another person would be like, that's so disrespectful. What makes them think that they have the right to give that to me? And so then we look at respect through these dimensions of hierarchy, because that exists in the workplace. The way you like to give respect and versus the way you like to get respect, because that's different too.
Right.
And then also what matters to you versus what should matter to you.
Yeah.
Or people often think about what should matter and not actually what matters.
What does matter, right? Because there are 2 different things.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be, as you know, I've bought a couple of copies
already. Yes,
already.
thank you, Nancy.
You bet. Any fellow author now, I'm like, oh, you're publishing a book. Let me pre-order, please. But I think it's, especially when you're dealing with people who are different from you and have different assumptions, it's super important to understand, well, what are their expectations? What are your expectations? And how are you gonna, I don't want to say finesse it, but
Mhm.
how are you gonna reframe, I guess,
Mhm.
your interactions with them? And especially right now when so many people are thinking about what they're going to do next, I think this is, and they may be talking with industries and communities and groups that they're not familiar with. This is going to be an incredibly valuable resource.
Yeah, and Nancy, there's like the individual's preferences for respect, and then there's also the team and the organization,
Mhm.
because teams also have their own collective forms of respect
Oh,
and
absolutely.
organizations. And I think of that as an organization, like the organization, that's the national language, and these different teams like marketing and finance and
Mhm.
engineering, those are regional dialects.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a great way. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking about different teams I've worked on over the
Mhm.
years where some are not always the most functional terms, but
Yeah, yes, I know where you've
or,
worked.
yeah, forms of respect. I have to say that many years ago, I got a lot of respect from a team because I offered to get a buzz cut when we hit a milestone. I have very short hair, and I'm in the barber's chair, and I'm saying to the barber, please make it look good. And the guys were all like, this is awesome.
Wow, Nancy, that talk about going to lengths.
Well, I had short hair at the time. It
Wow.
wasn't, it
Oh, I'd
wasn't.
love to see a picture of that sometime.
Oh, I'll send it to you. It was pretty funny. And afterwards, Andy and I had just started dating, and I called him and I said, I just want you to know that my hair is really, really short. And when he saw me, he was like, oh, honey, it looks cute. And I called the barber and I'm like, thank you. And that, and that where everybody who's listening to this is nodding and thinking, oh yeah, that one team, we had that crazy event and I got a lot of social credibility out of that. But and the bigger thing is, as you think about what you're going to do next, what are those forms that are going to be congruent with what's important to you? We're talking with a lot of people about discernment right now, and I think this falls right into that category, because a lot of people are thinking about, well, what are the factors that go into my discernment process as I make my next move? Well, believe it or not, this is our final question. For people who are looking to make a move like yours, what guidance would you offer to them as they evaluate their options? And I would say for you, because you moved from academia to publishing and marketing, and then into entrepreneurship, so maybe you could look at it from both angles.
So every time I've made a move, I've looked inside and kind of just listened to my gut, just like, is there anything here that makes me want to stay? And it's like, no. And then, and I think actually to prepare, if and for anyone who's considering starting their own business, some questions I would ask people to think about is, am I ready to ask for help? Because you're going to have to ask for a lot of help. And am I ready to delegate? And because I think that's also something that's been really important, just thinking about, why are you doing this? And then, like, for me, I wanted to have more time to create content, to write, and to be aware of the things that I like and that I don't like, and what I should delegate and what I should do myself, and what I need to pay for, and make sure that I also have the runway for that too. And to also understand that it's not, there are going to be tough times, right? And are you ready for that? Are you ready for the times where it's just like, oh, now I'm going to have to dip into my savings, so these are my investment times, right? Because it's not just, it's not all roses. And so I do want to share a story about asking for help. And this kind of goes back to the community too. And so I decided to self-publish this book. And in doing that, I decided to raise money through a crowdfunding through Indiegogo. And we actually ended up raising our goal in 18 hours and hitting more than 200% by the end. And so oftentimes people are like, oh, what social media did you use? Which I can tell you, 90% of the people who gave were people who knew me in some way. And to prepare for that campaign, I text messaged in the days before 120 people individually with their name, and asked them to make a pledge of at least $5. And it was a personal ask. It was not a mass email. It was a personal ask to them. And so when you are considering starting your own business, think about like, are you ready to do that? Because with opportunity comes responsibility.
Right.
So I will just share it like this morning. One of the things I've been struggling with is self-promotion, because I think that's a really hard part of having a business.
Yes.
And yet she's like, well, with opportunity comes responsibility. And for me, that means the responsibility of my team, right? Making
Right.
sure that I can make payroll and everything. And so I literally this morning on Slack, I was like, I am committing to 2 self-promotional pieces of work every day. That's my commitment.
Wow.
And it's because I was like, this is for my team. I need to do
Right.
this for my team. So
Right.
some questions to think about as you think about a move.
Yeah. And that, that's something that's actually very common with a lot of entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
It's like, I just want to focus on my core competency.
Mhm.
And you're right, is there's this bigger range of responsibilities that you have to pay attention to. When I know we're about to wrap up, but offline, let me share a couple of quick and dirty self-promotion opportunity tricks that we've learned. I am so grateful to you for joining us today, Dr. Julie Pham, founder of Curiosity Based and the author of The 7 Forms of Respect. In the show notes, we'll put social media links so you can pre-order the book and take a look at the work that Julie is doing. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This has been great.
It has.